So, this man was a gentleman called Harry Warner, and he was one of the famous Warner brothers. He was actually known as one of the founders of the talkies. And in 1925, he came up with a great quote, which is, "Who the hell wants to hear actors talk?" And the reason why I'm giving that example is, if somebody who was actually a founder of an industry found it very difficult to actually look within his industry at the time and come up with something which was really convincing and predictable and actually showed a real good understanding of what the industry was doing. It's very difficult sometimes for us in the middle of an industry like the talkies, and in this case mobile, to actually figure out what's going on. And what I'm going to try and do today is make some sense of that from a kind of overall perspective. Obviously I'm not going to go into the kind of detail that Robert was kind enough to share with us. So one of the things about mobile is that it's a great eater of other industries. It consumes, subsumes industries like you wouldn't believe. The first example of that is the pager. Second was the calculator. Just a quick show of hands, has anybody bought a calculator in the last year? Absolutely nobody. What else? The alarm clock. The number 3 use of the alarm clock in the under 25s of the mobile in the under 25s is the alarm clock. Again, has anybody actually bought an alarm clock in the last year? This is probably a good industry not to join, by the way. PDAs obviously have gone, been subsumed by mobile, and increasingly cameras as well. Nokia make more digital cameras a year than have ever been made in a non-mobile context. Now, when we talk about technology, there's basically 2 schools of thought, and hopefully a lot of you will be like this today, which will be convergentionists, which basically say, hey, bring it on, bring it all into my little device, and I can do whatever I want to every day, and won't that be fantastic? But the slightly more skeptical amongst us is what I call the separatista, who said, actually, you know, I can get a slightly better sound from my MP3 player, from my iPod today, than I can on the iPhone, and therefore I'm going to stick with that. I can get a slightly better photograph with my digital camera than I can with my mobile. This gentleman was is a man called Jim Richardson, and I was speaking with him in the US over the weekend, actually. And he was giving a keynote speech to a group of travel marketers. And Jim is a very old, 40-year-old experience in National Geographic, taking some of these sort of great photographs. One of his interests is particularly the Celtic world. And during a sort of discussion we were having about, you know, where are we going with mobile, where are we going with travel and everything, he actually made one of the most interesting points, I thought, of the whole weekend. And he said, actually, the most important camera you can have at any one point is actually the one you have with you at the time. Not necessarily the fantastic SLR, which makes a fantastic picture. It's actually the mobile you have with at the time, and that is increasingly the mobile, or the camera you have at the time. So what else is mobile going to overtake in the next few years or so? First, we've got video. I think you can see now a lot of the new mobiles have got video built in, and therefore it's going to overtake the actual specialist device. Mobile already has more devices in distribution already than the handheld specialist device for gaming. It's going to overtake the landline it already has in many countries, and increasingly we'll see people going mobile only, cutting the cord and not specialising in the landline at all. It'll certainly consume the iPod and the specialist MP3 player. And in fact, one of the reasons I personally believe that Apple actually launched the iPhone in the first place was because they could see at some point that their fantastic product, the iPod would actually overtake the mobile. And of course, the whole navigation side of things. We've seen Google Maps today. It's only a matter of time before we'll all be doing our navigation on our phones. Some other things coming up: couponing, health monitoring, translation, which we've seen Robert do already, keys, and the wallet, which Ian was talking about earlier on. These are all on the horizon. This is something which the mobile is going to take over. Probably slightly more controversially, the standalone desktop and the laptop, which is all on the convergence cycle now. And one of the things I've been saying for the last 5 years or so is that the mobile will do to the PC what the PC did to the mainframe. That doesn't mean to say there aren't any mainframes today, but it's much better to be a PC maker today, obviously. And the corollary is that it's much better to be in mobile in the future than it will be in the laptop. People say, well, hang on a second, particularly the convergenistas I was talking about earlier on, that's all very well, but how will you create Word documents, how will you create PowerPoint documents, etc. Now, I don't pretend to know what the tools are going to be, but I think we can get a glimpse of what those might be. This is an example, an early example of a docking system for Nokia phones, and more recently we've seen this happen with the iPad, where you can slot your iPad into a keyboard, and a fantastic way of creating documents rather than consuming them, which is, I suppose, what the iPad is better known for at the moment. So there will be tools. This man is Werner Bingay, who's a very famous science fiction writer, but he's also a computer scientist and a retired mathematician from the San Diego University. So he's a man who has got his finger in, certainly in the present as well as the future. He wrote a very interesting novel called Rainbow's End, which Ian perhaps ought to put on his reading list, since he's obviously into sci-fi. And he was talking about some of the tools which might be available for us to interact better with mobile than perhaps we have today, which will enable that dream to come true of replacing the laptop. And Rainbow's End has a kind of interesting scenario in the sense that it starts off with a man who is waking up, apparently, and what happened was 10 years ago or so he got Alzheimer's disease, and the beginning of the novel is him recovering from Alzheimer's, because society by that point has invented a cure for it. And they replace a couple of joints like his knees and his elbows or whatever, and he's actually equivalent to being a 40-year-old man, despite the fact he's over 70 at that point. But the basic problem he has is that he's missed out on the last 10 years of technology interface. And so he has to actually go back to high school and learn how to do it all. One of the scenarios he talks about being able to interact with the world is these contact lenses, which you can see on the screen. And he watches the world, basically people watch the world through contact lenses. You can actually see the real world like we can today if you fancy that kind of thing. But more importantly, you can see it through the digital world as well, and you can also see a view of augmented reality. And so what people are able to interact with their mobiles, or the equivalent of the mobiles in those days, if they want to send an email and you're kind of 70 or whatever, you have to sort of start going like this with sort of haptics and gestures. If you're a kind of cool kid who is 16 and you want to send an instant message to somebody, you kind of raise your eyebrow in a cool way and off it goes. So I think don't get too hung up on the idea of we need the current tools available to us in order to interact with the mobile. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to change pace slightly and look at mobile as a medium as opposed to an interactive channel. And I don't know if anybody knows what this is, but it's actually the very first example of a TV commercial ever shown in the world in 1941. And it was a 20-second commercial, and for the first 10 seconds, they literally just showed this image. The next 5 seconds was something like a voiceover which said, "America runs on bull over time," and then it was 5 seconds, and it was back to the ball game. And the reason why I use that as a good example of a medium is because it's the very first example of a TV commercial. And you can see that they were borrowing from what came before it. They had a bit of radio in there, they had a bit of magazines, etc. But they weren't really fulfilling the potential of the medium. They weren't using moving pictures as an example, they weren't really using sound. So 10 years ago we were talking about SMS, very basic push messaging, not a lot to it. You could get people to subscribe to your database and you could start sending them messages. Wasn't very exciting, to be honest, and had patchy results. A few years later we had MMS, which was at least added a bit of colour to it, and around about the time AdMob started, we started to do interactive banners, and the big shift there was obviously from a push messaging basis to a pull messaging basis, and that started the ball rolling in a big way. About a year later, we had interactive graphical banners, so we're beginning to see a bit something which perhaps a creative director would recognise as being something slightly interesting. And the big leap forward really was the iPhone and the fact that we could start developing specialist units for advertising. So we could start introducing different ways of interacting with the consumer, which they started to really appreciate. About 2 years ago, we had video for the first time, and I'll give you an example in a minute of how that works. And about the same time, we had our first $1 million advertising campaign, which was in 2008 in the US. But again, that was the first $1 million advertising campaign just with AdMob at the time. In the future, we're going to see more and more about location, which Robert's really covered. Augmented reality, which I think is going to be the next big thing in mobile. And increasingly coupons, and for those of you who are in the FMCG world, the ability to send a coupon to somebody's phone to redeem at the point of sale is going to be a huge leap forward, and will be one of those examples of something which the mobile phone can do, which the laptop can't. So essentially we've gone from this 10 years ago to this now, and this is an example of Reebok, a recent Reebok campaign. I'll just flick you quickly through that. So first of all, there's a banner, the consumer can wave over it, and there's a drop-down element to it, which they can then decide if they want to carry on and interact with it. If they do, they go to the specialist mobile web page, and again, the importance of optimizing here. And very many people then decide to go on and look at the video. And if they do, this is what it looks like. So you can see in just 10 years we've come from something which is very, very basic, which doesn't really excite a lot of people, but kind of works some of the time, to something which is recognisably a medium in its own right, and that creative directors, when they start thinking about this, can actually really believe in their hearts that it's going to work rather than just the understanding in their heads. So just to summarise really, we've seen the development of the mobile in its own right as a channel. We've seen it advertised as a medium. And one definition of marketing, I guess, is it's something which will acquire customers, it'll retain customers, and it'll help you build your brand. And mobile is, along with the desktop, almost unique in being able to do that. Some things like television, they can certainly help you build your brand and they can acquire your customers, but it's not a very good way of, for instance, building retention. And because of all that, because it's a 360 medium, we think that mobile should be first, which is really where we started this whole discussion this morning. Thank you very much.